Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and the king of the Hungaroring is back on his throne in Budapest with a phenomenal qualifying session ending in Lewis Hamilton taking pole position for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Side by side with Max Verstappen tomorrow going down into turn 1. A great qualifying session, so many talking points here. Daniel Ricciardo was one of them, Alfa Romeo another one, McLaren's upgrade, and their progress certainly continues, even on a circuit they thought wouldn't suit them. But a mixed day for Mercedes overall. They say the car's feeling great in a much better direction, and Hamilton reckons this shows the progress they're making in terms of where they might be in the coming races. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Firstly, practice was going on. There was poor Sergio Perez was suffering with issues like this arriving onto the broadcast. And look, at the end of the day, he did make Q3 today, but it wasn't a particularly emphatic Q3 performance, as we will see here over the coming minutes. FP3 was pretty interesting. Hamilton ended up P1, and it was alright. Is, a Red Bull holding something back here, or are they actually not quite finding their groove? Because let's not forget here, last year Verstappen started P10 and still won comfortably by 10 seconds, and you'd expect that Verstappen wins the race tomorrow. They've still got the fastest race car. All the race test simulation runs show that to be the case. But Verstappen isn't happy with the car right now. He doesn't feel the balance is great, and it does feel like they've failed to really nail it this weekend. FP1 was of course rained off, so they couldn't really do much running there, and ever since then they haven't maybe quite dialed in their upgrades as they would have hoped to, whereas McLaren are getting comfortable and Mercedes are definitely getting comfortable with great work clearly overnight by Mick Schumacher. We joked about it yesterday that poor Mick was locked in the simulator lab for hours on ends, and it turns out whatever he did overnight worked pretty well. Also, confirmation earlier in the day, the Hungarian Grand Prix will stay on the calendar until at least 2032. I love this track personally. It's not always been the greatest for racing, and it might not be great for racing tomorrow because last year was good, the regulations helped. Maybe tomorrow will be a different story. I guess we'll see. The cars this year are more difficult to follow, it seems, based on what the drivers say and what the data also indicates. But I think it is a great track. It's at least a proper racing circuit, and I'm always happy when a proper racing circuit stays on the Formula 1 calendar. There was also this update from Horner that this will be their last big upgrade. Red Bull will bring more, but what if they've done this weekend, which definitely I think will take them in the right direction, it's going to take them probably a bit longer to dial in the car, because if Verstappen was as angry and unhappy as he was after this quali, missing out on pole by 3 thousandths, he must think that car has way more potential if they get the balance right, and based on the fastest sector times, they would have been at least a couple of tenths clear here in qualifying. But Hamilton, despite his car, at least based on the numbers, being slower in every single part of the track, still put together a mighty lap that we'll get into in a second. Let's start qualifying then. But the other Mercedes was out, and it was such a mixed bag. It was very nearly a Mercedes sandwich on the grid. Russell was out in Q1. Q1 was really interesting, right? And I don't know what you guys think about this qualifying format. I kind of like it personally. I know that people think, oh, maybe it's a bit forced, but it's, well, hards in Q1, mediums in Q2, softs in Q3. It's very interesting, and it does really test the drivers and the cars in all the different circumstances. So I'm a fan of this personally. I like the way it went, and it created a phenomenal quali session. Let's not beat around the bush on that one. But Russell was caught in a monumental amount of traffic on the final corner, completely ruined his lap before it even started, and he ended up 8 tenths down on P1, and that was enough to be out. It was so tight, the margins here. Russell lost about 3 tenths going into turn 1 alone, so it wasn't enough. He's out of there. They might even decide to change some parts starting from the pit lane, and we could actually have a Mercedes sandwich. But also Tsunoda out in Q1, out qualified by just over, I think, 100th of a second by Daniel Ricciardo, who makes it into Q2, and very impressively as far as I'm concerned, out qualifies Tsunoda in his first time of asking. I didn't think this to be the case. I thought Ricciardo would take a couple of races at least to get up to speed. Out qualifying Tsunoda on a weekend where Perez is not looking particularly impressive is quite the feat for Daniel Ricciardo, and this was Toto Wolff being, here he is slamming the desk after Russell gets eliminated. So the frustration was boiling over. Again, Mercedes did the thing where they send the guy out last, which is fine in Q3 to get the absolute best possible track conditions, but in Q1, when you should have the pace and there isn't really much to be gained by better track evolution when you're talking not much margin over so many cars, Probably it's just better just to send him out at a better window. Russell wasn't happy. He said, took a gamble today, put ourselves in a difficult position and lost out as a result. The car felt great, the potential was there, and we'll get onto what else he says in a second. So Daniel Ricciardo, P13 today, which is a great qualifying performance in this very suspect AlphaTauri, especially when Alfa Romeo, out of nowhere, given the fact that they arguably had the other worst car on the grid going into this weekend's, they had a phenomenal time, and Ricciardo still puts it P13, out-qualifies an Alpine, I think, out-qualifies an Aston Martin, out-qualifies a Mercedes. So that's quite something for Ricciardo. Very impressive first qualifying performance there, hopping in the car. Sainz also ends his run of being in Q3 every quali session this season. Only Alonso now is remaining as the man to do exactly that. And then we went into Q3. The soft tyres got bolted on, and it was clear from early days that it was going to be competitive. Verstappen was up there about 3/10 ahead of Norris. Then Hamilton put a lap in 1/10 behind, and he thought, all right, this is still on. Verstappen's second lap then wasn't quite as quick, made a couple of errors, like he had, some snaps of oversteer and stuff. And even though Hamilton had a couple of snaps in the final sector, it's always a balance here, because if you push really hard in sector 1 and 2, your tyres at the end of the lap are they're gonna be struggling a fair bit. And Hamilton was holding on to the car in the final sector, and coming around the final corner, had the line been about 10 meters away, further away, he probably loses this pole position, because Verstappen had greater momentum off the final corner. But over the entirety of the lap, Hamilton put together a stonker. And let's not forget, Mercedes got pole here last year with George Russell. So, it's not like they haven't done this before. They've managed to do it again somehow out of nowhere. And Hamilton gets another pole position. He's 104th in Formula 1. He loves this track. There's no doubt about it. He's won it so many times. He's had pole position here 8 times before. And now 9th pole position. I mean, it's so insane. 9 pole positions at one circuit. That breaks the all-time record for pole positions at one track. He also held that record jointly with Michael Schumacher and I think Ayrton Senna. He's now pulled one ahead. What a lap from Hamilton. 3,000 is always going to make a cracking qualifying session, and this was Daniel Ricciardo's reaction upon seeing exactly what was going down at the time. And this is the reaction from the Mercedes garage. So starkly different emotions, right, a few minutes later from the Mercedes guys, given, this is Toto Wolff's reaction, hitting the table in a positive way a few minutes after hitting it very negatively for Russell being out. And yeah, that's right. So it was Ayrton Senna at the San Marino Grand Prix, in Imola 8 times, Schumacher Japanese Grand Prix, and now Hamilton Hungarian Grand Prix with 9 times. So lots of reaction to this, as you'd expect. Verstappen's reaction was incredibly negative, and I think this just shows why he's such a winner and why he's such a champion, because Verstappen was furious, to be honest. Like, his post-game analysis here, like his post-race qualifying analysis was, he said the car felt terrible, they hadn't got it in the right window, he was really annoyed that they hadn't been able to get pole position, because he was on this pole position streak, right? The last time anyone that wasn't a Red Bull got pole was back in Baku, right, with Charles Leclerc. The only drivers that aren't Red Bull that have got poles this year are Charles Leclerc and now Lewis Hamilton. So Verstappen was like, the car was terrible, says that the feeling, like, he doesn't care about the place on the grid. If the car doesn't feel right, I'm not happy. It can't always be perfect, but I'm trying to get as close to perfection as possible. So he's not happy with the car. He said there was oversteer, there was understeer, like that classic, was it 2014 Ferrari that Fernando Alonso unfortunately had to drive. Doesn't matter where you are on the grid. If it doesn't feel good, then it doesn't feel good. So, Verstappen was really critical here of the car and, the way it was going. And it just shows there is way more performance there for Red Bull. I know that Horner was also saying that Verstappen made a bit of an error, so he lost a little bit of time. But in fairness, you could argue Hamilton did the same in the last couple of corners. So there was still a little bit more time there on the table. And, it was a great battle between two great champions. And this time it was Hamilton that came out on top. Hamilton obviously was buzzing with this. And the question will be, is this the start of something for Mercedes? Have they finally got it figured out? I think many of us expected that they would be pretty good here. Like, they should have been in theory. The upgrades they brought earlier on in the season back in, well, they brought them in Monaco, but really we saw them in Spain, improved their high speed performance, and then it was about improving the slow speed performance. Now, their upgrades, apparently, the new front wing in Silverstone, did exactly that. So for a slow speed track, you'd have thought, well, they should be pretty good here. Hamilton's an absolute monster around here, there's no denying that. And they got pole here last year, even in the W13, and even Hamilton could have had pole last year. You guys probably remember his DRS broke in the final part of qualifying, so he couldn't set a benchmark lap, which could have well have been good enough to beat Russell. Who knows? Russell was on fire that day, and it was a beautiful lap that Russell put together. But still, Hamilton could have had pole here last year as well without that failure. So he says, it feels like my first pole position. It's been a long time, right? It's been, Jeddah 2021, his last pole. The last time that both Hamilton and Verstappen started on the front row was pretty sure Abu Dhabi 2021, right? it. So there's that as well to consider going down into turn 1 tomorrow. But as he says, it's a roller coaster ride. We were losing so much time in some other corners that he had to just full send it and hope that he stayed on the track, and that's what he did. Hopefully this shows we are on the right track and we can do it. We can close the gap if they keep pushing, and I think they'll be again inspired by what McLaren have done. Like another P3 for Lando Norris, P4 for Oscar Piastri, and they thought their car wasn't going to be as good here. They thought, well, their upgrades, they're going to work better in higher speeds, but they've done it again, McLaren. It's incredible. And Piastri was like, yeah, McLaren are back, baby. We are back in business. So if McLaren can make that type of progress, why can't Mercedes? And they've obviously got the platform to do so, and they've got the drivers to do so. So, hopefully it makes for an exciting second half of the season. Verstappen's probably going to win tomorrow. Let's not try to pretend otherwise. He's on the front row still. He might lead into turn 1. I mean, is he going to let Hamilton lead a lap? He won't want to. Will he try and send it turn 1? It's definitely possible. We've seen some shenanigans at turn 1 here in Budapest over the last couple of years. And as Hamilton admits, great to see McLaren up there. Max is always there. It's going to be really difficult to fight Verstappen tomorrow. And maybe Perez makes some progress in the field. He did also mention, Hamilton, some interesting comments on the Red Bull DRS. The high-level theory around this would be that somehow Verstappen's and Red Bull's DRS was illegal, and now they've taken it away because they were breaking the rules. I don't really think that's the case. I think other teams have improved, and on certain tracks, you don't necessarily see this mega DRS advantage. It seems to come out more so in the race than it does, I think, in qualifying for Red Bull. But I don't know. It's interesting. Hamilton comments on that and says that Red Bull's DRS advantage, I think even Alonso made a comment on this, doesn't quite seem to be what it was previously. He also, Hamilton says, we expected them to take around 0.2 of a second, so them not being able to extract that in qualifying is interesting, but I think in the race they're still the quickest, and based on the race runs, that is the case. We'll see how close Hamilton and Mercedes can get, and maybe a safety car, maybe a strategy thing, maybe a bit of rain. I'm not sure if the forecast predicts that, but who knows what's going to happen. Could switch things up, but I think Hamilton will need some luck in that sense, or just better strategy to hold on to Verstappen, because that Red Bull in the race is still going to be the fastest machine. Did want to comment quickly on Alonso though, because his theory is that the new tyre constructions, this isn't the new tyre rules in qualifying or anything, or the amount that are allowed in a session or in a weekends. This is the new tyres they brought in Silverstone, a new front tyre construction, I believe, that McLaren turned up that weekend and were great. Now, obviously, part of that's the upgrades they brought, but his theory is that Red Bull not getting pole here and Perez struggling in Q3, even though that occurred, to be fair, before the new tyres came in, McLaren being strong, and Aston Martin now struggling, shows that it's something with the new tyres. His theory is that it's not a coincidence that when the new Pirelli tyres came in Silverstone, there are a couple of teams that are struggling more, a couple of teams that are very happy with the car now, let's say McLaren. So he reckons that Red Bull and Aston have been hit with these tyres. Interesting, because those are the two teams that had this front suspension geometry that was pretty similar, that was giving them a lot of slow speed performance at the start of the season, and a lot of that is on the front end of the tyres. So you do wonder whether there's any truth to this for Alonso, but his theory is that they've taken a step backwards as a result of these tyre changes. So maybe that makes it even more possible to catch these guys up and makes for a rather entertaining race tomorrow, which hopefully we get. Stroll and Bottas, there was an incident there. Eventually Bottas wasn't punished, I believe, but incredibly as it is, they got both Alphas into Q3. And look, we know that tomorrow the front row is going to be spicy. Max and Lewis lining up alongside each other is always going to be a fun time, but look at this grid. It feels like this is surreal to look at. Hamilton, Verstappen, this wouldn't be a surprise if we're talking 2 years ago, but it's certainly a surprise today. Then Norris, Piastri, then Zhou, Leclerc. So Zhou, what a qualifying from Zhou. I don't really think I've mentioned him so far in as much detail as he deserved, but fantastic job from guanyu Zhou today to outqualify Bottas and to stick at P5, the fastest Ferrari powered car on the grid. I don't know what Alfa have managed, and also you've got to admit that the last time Alfa were good and made Q3 with Zhou, he got crashed out the first corner in Silverstone, so hopefully that doesn't happen tomorrow. But so Alonso P8, Hulkenberg made it all the way through. Perez again was 4/10 off Verstappen pretty much, so not great for him. He was struggling a bit. P9 is okay, he made Q3, but it's still kind of embarrassing in that Red Bull. And Verstappen's comments immediately after were yeah, this car, we should be P1, P2 type thing. So yeah, still dodgy for Perez, especially with Ricciardo just 2 rows behind him in P13, and that's how your grid looks. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Sorry for the late video, but I was a bit busy today, so we try our best. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.